You know me. So I have two sessions today. This morning, we're going to talk about discipline for younger children. And when we say younger, I'm going to say between 5 to 7 and younger. I think that there's a whole interesting conversation to have for mothers of infants and how to take care of babies and all that stuff, but that's not where I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus more like toddler onto young child. And then when we talk this afternoon, we'll talk more about what does discipline and our relationships with our older children look like as they grow past that age, because I think there's two really different phases of parenting. For those of you that don't know me, I have 12 children from the ages of 26 to 5. And our first three are married, and we have some grandchildren now. And by way of encouragement, before we begin, I know very well when we started our homeschool and our family, it did really feel like jumping off of a cliff in a lot of ways. Like we were starting life in a place where it felt like we were taking a lot of risks. We didn't have a community and older people in our lives who were modeling these things, and so there was a lot of speculation in our life and in our home in those early days, and the investments paid off. Yesterday was one of my daughter's 17th birthday, and we had the whole family together. The children were there, the grandchildren were there, everybody's there, and it's there's a lot of parts of my life that cause stress and worry, but that's not it. When my family's home, when my older children are there, when my grandchildren are there, it's I just kind of sit in this blissful place and I say, it was worth it. It works. It was a good investment. We did well. So I'm really glad to be able to report that to younger parents who are in a different phase, who are struggling, and it feels like it's toil and work, and are we doing it right? It really isn't a matter of doing everything right. It really isn't a matter of knowing all the answers. The one thing that I can assure you, as it pertains to raising children, and that's more what I'm talking about than school specifically, when it comes to raising children, the ability to love them well, to care for them as individual people, and to make your mistakes right and be aware of them are really the key factors for raising children, healthy children, as far as I know. For this conference, Finney and I did want to focus on discipline specifically, and I think there's a few reasons for that. Discipline of children is becoming a complicated issue in our day and in our age, in the church even. The ideas around parenting are changing with our culture. I'm from the generation that was much more children should be seen and not heard. I grew up in that world, and I don't have a lot of complaints. I had good parents; they loved me well. But the world was different when I was a kid, and there was much more of an attitude that children were kind of in a different world. Like, we were still, our generation, I left the house Saturday morning after cartoons, and they didn't see me again until the streetlights came on. And it's not like we had phones. Nobody knew where we were. Nobody knew what trouble we were getting into. We were just feral children. I remember there was a time when they had public service announcements. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? That was really how the world was. We were really independent. And there are certain things that created in me that I'm grateful for, but it wasn't all good. I've watched now, being a grandparent, how the ideology around family, and especially fatherhood, because I pay more attention to that, has changed over the generations in my own family. I think that my grandfather, who was an immigrant, would have been the first kind of of his line to get on the to care well for his children and how they were interacting with him, like the family table and talking to each other. That stuff mattered. My father was probably the first to get on the floor and wrestle with his children. I was the first to change diapers and take care of babies. Like my dad, I don't know if my dad's ever changed a diaper in his life. And we have 4 kids in our home. That was just mom's job. That's how the division of labor was. And as I'm watching the ideologies around family, and I pay specific attention to the church, and I travel in the church, we're changing how we think about parenting and child rearing. And we're much more focused on our children. Like they've been integrated into our worlds in a way that is relatively new, socially speaking. They're not a separate category. They're not set in another room. They're not over there. They're here among us. You know, we're doing that in our churches with family integrated worship and a lot of different things where we want the children to be a part of our lives all the time, not set apart into a different category. And that's wonderful things. I'm grateful for all of those changes in our culture and in our society, and especially in the church. They're almost all good things. But what I am seeing is that shift and that change is a trajectory that keeps going. And so what I'm starting to notice among us, among young families, is that we're very good at caring for our children, caring how they think, caring how they feel, talking to them, creating communication, valuing their perspective and their opinion. These are the new things that are good in parenting. But what we're losing sight of is the ability to obey and having discipline and order. And so there's almost a one-to-one correspondence to how empowered our children are emotionally, communication-wise. The way that we're empowering our children does a lot of good things for their holistic development, but it's not doing good for order and obedience. And so as we grow our families in this cultural climate, I think, you know, in my age, we had to think about certain things. Now, I think it's really important that we think and talk about discipline and order and obedience. And I'd like to talk a little bit about why that is. I think that there's the underlying principle that I have for what we should think about with these young children, the little ones in our home, is that I think it's very valuable for children to grow up at these young developmental ages. And this is really the important phase. When we're talking 5 and under, this developmental age is really important for setting a whole paradigm for how the world is. Like these are the most important years. I think 5 and under is probably the most pivotal and formational time of a person's life. And what goes into a child and their worldview and how they see and how they experience, you know, the attachment that they have with their parents and their siblings, the order that they grow up in, the ability to obey and listen, these things set a tone for the rest of the life. It's not that they can't be changed later, but that when you start well, you have a foundation under you as a whole person that changes everything for the rest of your life. And so this is why I think it's really important that we have all this culture of caring for children, listening to them, empowering them to understand their feelings and emotions, not just putting them in a side room and letting them raise each other, but also planting in them the idea, this is the root idea, I live in a world. Like here's the 2 alternatives. We raise children that the world is about them or they are in the world. Those are 2 alternative paradigms for a child growing up in this day and age. And if you grow up and the world is about you, it caters to your whims, there's you know, I throw a fit, I get what I want, that this is, if that's the way that you spend those early formative years, you have expectations about the world that are not real. that the world as you grow and become an adult will not cater to the way that you have an environment when you're a little child that does cater to. And so teaching our young children that you live in a world where there are expectations, there's expectations on your behavior, there's expectations on your attitudes, there's expectations on what you do and don't do. Those are really important, rooted principles to put in a child's life from the beginning. So the danger that I worry about for the church and for raising children in this environment is that if we don't do something in the early developmental stages to stem the impulse of self, that's really what it is. Let's think about it this way. When you're a baby, I'm not a Calvinist, so I don't believe that children are born sinners. I think that sin is a choice. I don't think that children are little monsters morally. I don't believe any of those things. I think children are good. I think they're made in the image of God, and they start pure. And as a pure little child, they have no capacity to care for themselves. You think of a little baby at the mother's breast. They can't do anything but cry. They cry when they're soiled. They cry when they're hungry. They cry when they're hurt. It's the only thing they do. There is only one thing in that person's world, and it's me. That's where we start. Everyone starts from the womb that way, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's natural. That's how it's designed. That's beautiful, and it's wonderful. And so from the beginning, from nativity, when we start our life, everything in the world comes around us. I cry when I'm fed. I cry when I'm soiled, I get changed. I cry when I'm hurt and someone comes and takes care of me. I cry when I want a toy and somebody picks it up. I cry when something drops and somebody picks it up. This whole world revolves around me. And the developmental task of parents is to walk that beautiful baby into a world where now you start to see, oh, there's more than just me here. It's not just me. This is neurological development, this is social development, and it's moral development. That we start to learn that the world is not all about me, that there are other people here, that there are other concerns, that I don't always come first. As I grow and get older, there's a new baby now maybe, and that baby has to be those needs have to be put in front of my needs. All of this developmental trajectory is how a whole human is developed. And so we want to intentionally use this phase of a child's life to put this consciousness of other in them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if we don't leverage that, if we don't specifically focus on creating expectations around obedience and listening and living in a world that's not all your own making, what you end up with is these self-willed, self-aggrandized, self-important young people, and that's a dangerous thing from a Christian perspective. One of the things that often gets talked about in terms of discipline of children is the issue of corporal punishment. I'm going to talk about a book later this afternoon. I'm going to mention and recommend called Discipline That Connects with a Child's Heart. There's a passage that in that book where they talk about this issue, and I think they have a really good treatment of the issue of corporal punishment as it pertains to discipline. I don't mean to make that a big part of my talk. There's different ideas in the Christian community about the value of corporal punishment for children, and I don't think that there's one specific answer for that question. I think there's a lot of good ways to talk about that issue in raising children. Whether you use corporal punishment or not, I don't think that's a necessary thing to raise Christian children, but whether you do or not, there should be some form that we have for our little children that they grow up with an expectation that I have to be beholden to somebody else's will. This is the piece that I think is really important, that parents exert a will over a child so that they have some sense of order in the world. And as I watch different families wrestle with these issues of how to discipline little children, I watch the children and how children respond. And children are little geniuses. They're, especially at this age, they're little scientists, and they're trying to figure out the world. I marvel at the idea that a baby who has no language skills develops the ability to talk over the course of a year. It's phenomenal. They don't have a lexicon, they don't have a library, nobody's teaching them. Just through listening and observing, they develop language, and that's brilliant. It's amazing. That same intellect, that same mind, that same capacity is figuring out not just the language of the world, but the order of the world around them. And so when as parents, when you have these little ones and they're testing the boundaries and they're, okay, let's do a real practical example. The little child sitting at the table, or you're holding them in their arms, they have a toy, they throw it on the ground. You pick it up, they laugh, they throw it on the ground. You pick it up, they laugh, they throw it on the ground. This is an experiment. This is a scientific experiment that a child's doing. What are the parameters of this kind of play? And when you get to the place where you say, I'm not doing that, I'm not picking it up anymore, they get upset. Pick it up. We were playing a game. And they're trying to figure out, how does this world work? When can I throw it and when can I not? When can I go in the other room and when can I not? When can I cry and when can I not? When can I throw anything and when can I not? When can I eat and when can I not? When can I? All of these things are experiments that our children are doing. And creating order and some kind of understanding about the world through discipline is how that order starts to make sense. So when we become consistent with discipline with children, when the rules become understandable, this is when children thrive. This is why discipline is a really important subject. Because if the rules are always changing, consistency is what matters. So I meet families that have different rules all the time, different sense of what is okay and what's not okay within our home. And that doesn't bother me at all. I don't have any problem with that. Everyone should make rules that fit within their home. That's great. The only problem is when there's inconsistent application. So when I do something and one time I get in trouble for it, I do it again and I don't get in trouble, this is where now I have to figure out what's the rule. What actually is the case? So I did this thing and I got in trouble. Maybe my hand got smacked, or maybe I had to go sit in the corner, or whatever happened. Okay, that's interesting. When does this happen? When does it not? I do that same thing again. Now mom's busy, or mom's frustrated, or mom's talking with somebody, or something else is going on, and I don't get in trouble and I get away with it and I can do it. Well, now I have to figure out what's the difference between those two scenarios. And so the little scientist is trying to figure out, what's the difference? Is the environment different? Is mom different? Am I different? Was the action different? And so they'll keep pushing and keep testing and keep seeing, where is the line? What's this parameter that's different in this case, in this case? And this is why consistent application of discipline is the most crucial thing. So what that means for us as parents is that pick the order that you want to have and have it. Have consistency in application for what discipline looks like in your home. This is so obvious if you think about it in certain respects. Erica, my wife, had this insight when we were talking about consistency and discipline one time, many, many years ago. Every night when the children go to take a bath, they take their clothes off, they get in the bathtub. I have never walked into the bathroom with a little child and they're in the bath with their clothes on, because they have never gotten in the bath with their clothes on. Every time you take a bath, you take your clothes off. It's not work, it's not hard, you don't have to teach them that. They just know. You take their clothes off when they're a baby, you put them in the bath. You take your clothes off when they're a little child, you put them in the bath. They know from the consistency of that when you take a bath, you take your clothes off. And so everything works this way. Whatever you're consistent about, you are training the child to understand the world in those parameters. And so wherever you're inconsistent, you're creating doubt and question and misunderstanding. Wherever you're consistent, you're training in every consistent action that you do in your home. If you always set the table before you eat, you're training the children that way. If you always brush your teeth before you go to bed, you're training the children that way. Whatever you do regularly, that's what you're training the children for. And the only problem that we have two problems when it comes to that. It's hard to be consistent in a lot of things, especially in conflict or busyness or other. There's a lot of things that make it hard for us to be consistent. But the bigger problem, I think this is a bigger problem, is that we're not often intentional. We're not often thinking about what we're teaching the children. So if the discipline in my home, the order in my home is contingent on my emotions, or my feelings or my busyness or my frustration, I'm creating chaos in the worldview of the little scientist. That's the fact. So when my emotions alter the outcomes of the child's experiments, I'm creating an unstable world for them to grow up in. They don't understand the rules. They don't understand how the world works. And this is really this is how we should think about parenting little children. We're helping them with their experiments. They're figuring out the world, and we're showing them where the parameters of the experiments are. And this is why when you see children who are well disciplined, they have a stable air. They feel confident. I think that a consistent application of discipline for children makes children who are very well rooted in the world. They understand the world around them. They understand the rules of engagement. They become social better earlier. They become able to explore the world in better ways. Like, there's just a lot of good outcomes from creating those stable experiments at home that allow the child to have some kind of framework to then go out and explore the world. The children who become selfish and self-willed, and they whine a lot and they cry a lot and they hit a lot and all these things, again, we're talking about this 5 and under age bracket, the world doesn't work for them well. And so when they're in social environments, when they're with other children, they're doing the same thing. They're trying to figure out what are the rules of this engagement. And so if it works, if it's unstable at home, I don't know how the rules work there. How are the rules going to work in these other environments? And there's just no groundedness to work from. In all of that introduction, I don't want to come across as the old preacher, like back in my day, kids did what they were told. I don't want to go backwards. I'm not trying to return to some golden era of parenting. I'm saying that we should go forward. I'm saying that we have a lot of good things about our culture and our expectations about how valuable children are and how important they are, how much we need to engage with their minds and their hearts from the earliest ages on up. I just want to do that in a context that creates order in their world. I want to look at a couple of scriptures quickly. Hebrews chapter 12 is the first. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 5, it says this. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof are all partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us and gave them reverence. Shall we not much more rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. He for our profit. So our fathers chastened us for their own pleasure, but God chastens us for our own well-being, that we could be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. What he's saying is that because our fathers chastened us, because they made us obey, because they disciplined us, we respected and honored them. I tell this story fairly often. It's a very poignant memory in my life. When I was a young man, I was very rebellious, and I lived on the streets for a while. When I met my wife, we were homeless and living on the streets and living crazy lives. And I was in this phase of my life as a young man. I was into a lot of trouble. I was street fighting. I thought I was a real tough guy. And I remember walking down a particular street in my town where the freeway comes. I was meandering somewhere, who knows, probably up to no good. And I was walking down the street smoking a cigarette. I'm probably 19, 20 years old, been out of my home for a couple years. And I happened to notice that from the traffic and some other things, that it was kind of the end of the day, like the end of the workday, like around 5, 6 o'clock. And as I was walking down this section of road, the thought occurred to me, my dad could be coming off the freeway here and see me. And because I knew that my dad might be driving by that location, I threw my cigarette away. I didn't want my dad to see me smoking a cigarette. Now, I'm a reprobate. I'm a drunkard. I'm a street fighter. I'm all kinds of trouble. Nothing but trouble. But I'm worried that my dad would see me smoking a cigarette. Because my father disciplined me when I was a boy, I had reverence for him. I had a sense of honor that did, even in the midst of all of that, there was something inside of me that didn't want to shame him. I didn't want him to be ashamed of me. There were plenty of other reasons that he was, and he was very gracious to me, and I have a great relationship with my dad now. I love him very much. But that is such a pivotal experience that none of that is sensible, right? Like none of that makes sense that I would care about that particular thing at that particular time in my life. But the discipline that my father gave me as a child made me honor him and respect him. I cared what he thought. And this is the point about bringing children into a world that exists, bringing them into a world of expectation, bringing them into a world that everything isn't about me. And so our discipline, our chastening, our control of our children to make an ordered world, it creates respect and honor. And God uses the same principle when he chastens his children to create honor and respect for holiness. Like he does the same thing with us as new creatures. He chastens us and disciplines us and teaches us how the spiritual world works the way that we do with children in the physical world. And the same process happens when we physically discipline our children, when we create order in their lives. We're creating the same kind of respect that God is doing when he spiritually chastens us, when we run into brick walls, when things don't work, when we feel like we're messing up. This process that happens in the spirit, we should be practicing with our children. What that means is that in all of this, we should really have an eye not for the child, and this is an important concept in both younger children and older children. The order and discipline that we use in our homes should be for the child, not for me. This is a principle that I think Paul is pointing out here when he says, our fathers chasten us for their own pleasure. We want our discipline to be better than that. We want it to be more like what God is doing in our lives. And so we want the discipline that we're using as Christian parents to be with a mind towards the long term. In other words, I think there's a side effect from having consistent order and discipline in our homes, that the home functions better. And that's good for our mental health and frustration, a bunch of other things. But that isn't the primary purpose. That's a side effect. The primary purpose of discipline and order is for the child's well-being. And we want to keep those motives straight, that when we're training and disciplining our little ones, it's to create a whole person. It's not because it's easier for me or better for me. In fact, here's the thing. Here's the thing about this. If the reason you discipline your children is for your own well-being, you'll do it more when you're frustrated or upset because you're trying to create order for yourself. If you're disciplining for the good of the child, you'll get up out of the chair when you're at rest and when you're frustrated, when you're tired and when you're not tired. If the child is the reason for the discipline, it will be more consistent because it doesn't matter if I'm upset or if I'm not upset. It doesn't matter if I'm tired or not tired. It doesn't matter if I'm frustrated or not frustrated. This matters for the child. And so even when I'm having a difficult day, because this is where it usually happens, right? The typical course, and I know it well, is that Mama's had a long day at work, I've had a long day with the children, I've had a long day at work, we come home, and we kind of would really just like to take it easy. And so the children are bickering and they're fighting and it's disorderly and it's chaos, and you just don't want to deal with it. And so a lot of stuff slides. And then a lot of stuff slides, and then it finally gets bad enough, and somebody's screaming, or somebody's crying, or somebody got hurt, or something happened, and now I got to get up and I got to go deal with it. But now when I get up and go deal with it, my interest is my own peace and my own ability to not have to deal with this. And so frustration comes out, all these, whatever bad tendencies I have as a parent, they come out in that environment. Now, reverse that whole evening. You come home, you're just as tired, she's just as tired, but my mind is not for my own peace and to sit down and to have order in my world, or at least quiet, but my mind is for the good of my children. Now when they start bickering, I know I got to get up and deal with this, because if I don't, that's how it's going to go. And if I don't, that child isn't going to learn the order that needs to happen. The child isn't going to learn what it means to live in this house. The child isn't going to have a consistent principle for what we do and don't do in our behavior. And so you can see, if you run that experiment 1,000 times in 5 years, how much difference it makes in what your focus and motivation is in why you're disciplining your children. It makes an incredible difference. So we want to have a mind for the long term. We want to ask ourselves, okay, if I'm not teaching them, when are they going to learn it? What do you mean by that? If the child writes on the wall and I don't want to deal with it, or they break their sister's toy and you don't want to deal with it, or they're biting each other, or who knows what's happening in the house. When that's going on, if you're not going to step into that space and teach them, when are they going to learn that? And how are they going to learn? How are they going to learn you don't write on the wall? How are they going to learn you don't break your sister's thing? How are they going to learn don't bite each other? How are they going to learn that if you don't step into that and teach them? And so there's an impulse. Some people have it turned up too high and some people have it turned down too low. That I talked to my wife about. For me, it's screaming. My children don't scream because it just grates in my ear. Like when I hear a baby crying or a child screaming, it doesn't matter how tired I am, it doesn't matter how sick I am, I got to get up and deal with that. And I think that's that's a good impulse. We just need more of it, and it needs to be at the right tone. So what do I do when that happens? That's another question. But that I don't ignore it, that I don't let it be. This applies to all these different things that have to do with disciplining children: the writing on the wall, the breaking of the stuff, the screaming, the fighting, the whining, the bickering. Okay, you have a whining child. Well, one of my children, they just whine and whine and whine all the time. Every time they say something, it's whining, or it's why, the whole thing. When are they going to learn not to be that way? Are you just waiting for them to grow out of it? What does that mean to grow out of it? If they're growing out of it, then they just figured out their own solution to that problem. They didn't figure out your solution, they figured out their own solution. If you have a whining child and you're not addressing it, you're not teaching them how to respond right, you're not giving them the tools for how to properly communicate their needs and their desires, they're going to learn that lesson. They're not going to be 30 years old and whining like that. But what lesson did they learn? What did they put in place of the whining? Because the whining is communicating a need, right? And this is whenever problem you have with your little children, if they're scientists, you should be a scientist too. You should be a scientist of that child. They're your experiment. They're your thing to figure out. They're your question about how this human works. And so when this child is whining, every time they talk, they're whining, or every time they interact, they're hitting, or every time, whatever the common problem with the child is, no one's going to figure that out but you. That's your job to figure out. And you need to do your own experiments. You need to figure out where it's coming from. Where's the whining coming from? What can we do? What's missing in this child's understanding of the world that they don't know? That doesn't help you get what you want. You have to show them. You have to create some way to teach them and create that order in their life so that they know, when I feel this way, this is what I do. And it works. That's the job of disciplining. And that lesson goes on and on with them. I think sometimes, just speaking practically about these issues, as homeschoolers, another issue that we face is that, and again, I'm not trying to turn back to this, but there's not a lot of schoolyard justice for our children. What I mean is that a mean or a rowdy or a child who doesn't play by the rules or has problems with everybody, there was a schoolyard justice way that got handled in the public school. If you acted certain ways, you got beat up. I don't think that's good. That's why I don't send my children to public school. I'm not advocating that system. I'm saying there was a social order in effect in the schoolyard that you acted certain ways and you didn't act in certain ways. And a lot of us left that system specifically because of that. Amen. But how are they learning those social rules? Like, what's been put in that place? What happens when Johnny is being nasty to the other kids? What happens when he can't share his toys? What happens when he throws a fit every time he loses? He's not going to get beat up in our circles, praise God. But how is he learning the lessons that the schoolyard is teaching to kids? Where are they going to get that from? And what that means is that with these little children, this phase of life, I tell my married children now who are in this phase, there's just a lot of work, guys. It's a lot of work, especially to have a bunch of little ones. If you've got bump little kids, it's a lot of work. Don't weary in well-doing. Take the time to figure out, be involved in their play. I don't mean, I'm not, it's a good thing to sit on the floor and play Legos with your kids and do all that stuff. I mean, when you're with another family, when you're in a church environment, when you're in a social environment, when you're on the playground, it's easy to want to take the break and hang out with the adults or talk. That's good, you need that. But also keep one ear on the playground. Keep one ear on the pile of toys. Keep one ear on the little kids and how they're talking to each other. Pay attention to what happens there, because that's where you're going to get the opportunity for how to teach and train and address things. And when they're younger, like the 3, 4 age, when the fight happens, stop the conversation and go figure it out. Talk to them, train them, teach them. You have to get involved. Don't let them figure it out by themselves. Don't revert to schoolyard justice. Don't let the biggest kid win. Don't let the meanest kid win. Don't let the one whose toys it is win. Don't let that process be what teaches and trains your children. You teach and train your children. Step into that environment and say, what's going on here, kids? Hopefully in close community, we're able to do that with each other. I know in a playground that can be a little more complicated, or environments that are not, friends and people we go to church with. But especially there, especially when we're with our own kind of communities, make sure and step into those environments and do the work. Find a solution. Make sure that they're getting along well and nobody's being taken advantage of. We could talk for days about, how do you referee this stuff with children? And if you have some specific questions, we'll have some sessions later that you can ask. Because it can get complicated. I'm not saying it's not. Adjudicating these things, who had the toy, who did what, but don't use that as an excuse not to get involved. Do get involved. You're the adult there. You need to help them understand how to live in that world. The idea for when are they going to learn it is something that should constantly be in our minds, especially when we interact with problems that our children are having in the world. When are they going to learn delayed gratification? How are they going to learn it? When are they going to learn patience, obedience? When are they going to learn how to be calm and sit quietly? That's not a natural state of a child, to sit quietly. They don't do that on their own. I mean, they do when they sleep, but that's about it. So when are they going to learn how to be calm and what to do with their energy and how to sit quietly for at least a few minutes? When are they going to learn those things? How are they going to learn how to overcome, to honor, to yield, to share? All of these lessons are our job to teach our little ones. A good question to ask when it comes to all of this is, what is it like to be a child with your child? How do they play? How do they follow rules? What do they do when they win? What do they do when they lose? How do they share? Like, ask those questions about your little children in this stage so that you know what needs to be worked on. Because if you know, like every time we're with Sally, you guys are fighting. So we're going to work on that when we're home. Every time we're in this environment, you don't play well, or let's work on that at home. Like, take those lessons and purposely engineer a way to train the children to do better with those things. I really think that the reason I focused young children in this age bracket is that by 5, most of our children should have most of the ability to listen and obey. There's later struggles in childhood and development that people have to work out, but the ability to listen to mom and dad and to be under control, be under discipline, should pretty well be in place by 5 or 6. That at that age, you should be able to say to a child, hey, sit down, and they'll sit down. Hey, come over here, and they'll come over here. Hey, stop that, and they'll stop that. That's the age that you want to have that established, where there's a sense of order in the child's life that you can dictate. And if you don't have that by that age, or in whatever places you don't have that at that age, those are warning signs. Like if you have a 5 or 6-year-old and he doesn't listen when you call him, or he can't sit down, or she can't, set the table for you, and that's a task that she knows how to do. If whatever that is, you really need to zero in by that time and figure out what's going on. Not that please don't misunderstand. I don't mean that your child is perfectly formed by 5 and they don't have any problems, or there's no disciplines after that. I just mean the ability to listen and do what mom and dad say should be well entrenched by that age. If you use physical discipline, that's about the end of that epoch. That's when you should be done with that. If you don't, those mechanisms that you put in place instead of corporal punishment, you shouldn't have to be using past that age, whether it's sit in the corner or whatever you do instead. So that's kind of a mark to look for around the age of 5 that we should be mindful of. I had a lot more to talk about, but I'm going to short that and talk some more about some practical things. I think that there's 2 kind of ditches for parenting. There's the permissive ditch, and there's the protective ditch, and both of them are ditches. I think that what I've been talking about mostly is the permissive ditch, where you're slow or reluctant to bring order and discipline to the child. But there is an overprotective ditch too, and the overprotective side of parenting, it doesn't look the same as the permissive side. The overprotective side, the children are generally pretty well in order, especially in public. But the problem on the overprotective side, something that if you tend towards that more authoritarian style of parenting, the problem on the overprotective side of parenting is that you can create conditions where the children will act one way when they're under your sight and a different way when they're not. That they know that there's enough control in their life, but all of their worldview, all of their paradigm has been conditioned not on principles or understanding, but on control, on external control. And so overprotective parents will be very quick to discipline, they'll be very quick but if they step out of the room, there's nothing that's kind of guiding the child. They haven't learned the principles behind why we do what we do. They haven't learned to empathize, they haven't learned to care. So when you're sitting in the room watching the children play, they play great. As soon as you walk out, there's fights and there's problems. This is what happens in the overprotective side of this of the equation. And when that's happening, again, we need to do some self-assessment as parents and understand if we're in that side of the spectrum and say, okay, well, when I'm there, things work great, but then I hear these things when I'm not in the room, or other children are having trouble with my children, it's surprising, or I think that things are going great, but then I find out they're lying and I'm just shocked by that. I can't believe the child did that. When you're in that end of the spectrum, you're missing the guiding principles behind why the child should behave a certain way. And there can even be a transition in parenting style over the time. Like as the children get older, sometimes you develop this sensibility that it worked when they were little, but now something's different. And so we need to transition the way that we think about our parenting and start moving more towards the why, not the what. And that's what can get missed in that end of the spectrum. Keep your eyes on the prize. I just want to remind you all that we're not raising children. They are children. We're raising whole humans. That's the goal. Whole humans. I love that expression. It sounds kind of small and trite, but a whole human without broken, fragmented parts inside of them, without things that they have to spend years in therapy figuring out, without a missing component to the reality of God's world, without an emotional strain or problem in their life. Whole humans. I understand myself and I understand the people around me well, and I can function in God's world. That's a whole human. I can reflect the attributes of God that I'm an image bearer of. There's another principle that I use a lot, especially with little children, and it's just a way for me to think practically about what discipline in my home looks like. It's not so much discipline in correcting behavior, but discipline in the sense of making disciples. And in the sense of making disciples, my favorite way of thinking about parenting is to be the narrator of the world to your children. I love this concept. I grew up, I love these David Attenborough films. You watch these nature films, and you're watching something, but there's a narrator there explaining what you're seeing and what you don't know about the thing that's in front of your eyes. And that is a beautiful description of parenting, that you're there in that child's life to describe the world and what's happening that they can't see with their eyes. So they see something in front of them, but you're there to explain it. Not just to see it, but explain it. This is a beautiful thing to hold on to as our role and our responsibility and our privilege to explain the world to our children. This is part of making them disciples. I'm going to stop there, and we'll have some time for question and answer. We have about 10 or 15 minutes where we can ask or answer any questions. I don't mind if that's collaborative too. Did you?
So I think one of the main challenges that comes from the point that we mentioned about, I'll call it vigilance. People are tired or whatnot, is that there's not an easy way, at least, to have a standard about what.
There's Mike.
Oh, thank you. There's not an easy way for someone to know, are they vigilant or not, or how does that compare to somebody else? Because we've all been in situations where the parents are kind of not aware of how rowdy or disorderly things are, and you feel sort of bad in raising that. But it's very different from, say, you take a test in science class and okay, I got an A, I got a C. You know where you're at,
right?
And so, given that there's not as easy of a standard, how does one calibrate there?
I would say that there's probably two major calibrations in assessing how I'm doing as a parent, especially when we're talking about young children. I think how is the relationship doing well? Do you have good access to the child's heart? I mean, can you handle the rise and fall of problems from day-to-day life? So that's because children will become cold or indifferent or difficult or hard to access, or they'll shut down, or they'll be quiet, or they won't respond, or they'll get shy, or all these different indicators that something's misaligned in our relationship. So that's one thing that would indicate that we got to work things out here. The other thing I think is just how well they're working in the world. And so in those cases where you have, you're in a social setting with a bunch of families and there's a child that's, a couple of children or a family that it's not working with them in the mix. A lot of the problem is the awareness. Like, I think calling each other to be aware in our church settings, in our social settings, in our small groups, in these ways, calling parents to be aware. Like, are you mindful of what's happening with your children? Are you paying attention? That's where a lot of it gets missed. There's can be some other, I think, social reasons that people, you get embarrassed, or there's shame, or don't know what to do. If that's the case, if you find yourself in that place where you're in that place, find some help, talk to some people, read some books, start digging into those issues. Don't just stay there. I see it fairly often because there's phases where children are just difficult. I see it with young families all the time. You just go through a phase and one of your children's just, it's like a screaming fit every time we go out. You're like, what in the world is going on? It's my third child. Why is it this way? Like, I haven't gone through this before, but here it is. Every time we're out of the house, this poor child is just screaming their head off, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do. I don't want to be caught up on the variability of an individual child or an individual situation, but we do want to look at the trajectory. Like, where are we getting to? And do I have a sense of what, at least that I know what I should be working on? I'll throw this out as just a very practical thing, especially when my family was young. Eric and I were very good about keeping a track of the children, because I had a lot of little children in those early years. And so we kept on our whiteboard for years. We kept on our whiteboard each of the children's names and what we were working on, because there were specific issues for specific children, that this child has been throwing a fit, this child isn't listening well, this child won't do their chores, this child, whatever it was that we were working on, as just kind of a constant reminder. We would look at it and often talk about it if we were at the table. How did it go during the day? As the father of the home, when I would come home for supper, that's in the dining room when we're eating. And so I'm asking, how did it go with this today? How did it go with this child today? How did that go today? Or we have opportunities to talk about those things. That kind of intentionality, I think, is almost always required. It doesn't have to be that version of it, but that level of intentionality is what it means to have little children, especially a bunch of them. That there should be a sense of, we are working here. There's things that we're mindful of. We know what we're doing. We know what we need to do. How to get there, I really think that the drive is the answer, not the answers. Like, if you have the drive and the heart to be intentional with your children, to raise them well, you'll figure out how to do it well. But it doesn't work the other way. Any other questions? This is a pretty general overview. I know we didn't get super specific, but Sarah. Mm-hmm.
For those who couldn't hear, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about the overprotective side, and just elaborate on that.
That's it. Yeah. I think that we want to have a mind to be putting into the child what we want. And there's a shortcut around putting it into the child, that I become the child's conscience or enforcement. And so if I'm finding that over and over again, I have to tell them again and again, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And if I'm not there saying that, they're not following that, then I'm missing actually putting it into the child's life and heart. So I can create an environment, especially if I'm more on the authoritarian side. I can create an environment just through force, because I'm bigger, that the child will conform to what I want. But if I'm not consciously trying to incorporate those values into the child, they won't learn it. they'll rely on me to be their conscience. They'll rely on me to be their control mechanism. And that's why when I step out of the room, then it all falls apart. Or they can't be trusted, or they're lying, or whatever else happens, because they haven't incorporated those values. And so what I would suggest to a parent who's struggling with that overprotective side is to step back some. Create situations where the child can work in an environment just on the periphery or the edge of my awareness. I don't want to step back too far away because we know there's going to be problems if I've been overprotective. So I want to step back enough that I can observe or hear or find some way to put the child in an environment where we have to kind of see what comes out. And then don't rush in then. So when a problem happens, don't rush in right then and say, see, I told you not to do that. Wait, let it play out, step back, and then address it at a non-conflict time and say, hey, and we're talking about older children now by the time we're at this place, but certainly 5 to 7, we could start having these kinds of conversations like, when you're in this place and mommy and daddy aren't there, you're having these kind of conversations. Let's talk about that. Why is that happening? And use a non-conflict time. Don't rush in, because that just reinforces again that I'm your conscience. Let's pull aside and in a different avenue approach this issue and say, why is this happening? Let's talk about it. I want to teach you what God thinks about this. Let's look at the scriptures. Let's talk about what the implications of this behavior are, or what happens when you do this, or what would happen if you kept doing this, or whatever the problem is, address it in a teaching format instead of control format. The beautiful thing about homeschool is we have lots of opportunity to do that. And homeschool is a great place to see these places. I think that for a large family like ours, self-directed learning was a very important key for us to get through homeschooling with so many children. And so we had to have children who could function in an environment where they weren't being controlled, where I can't stand over 12 children and make all of them do their work. And so we needed to and that was a good opportunity to see, will they do what they're supposed to do without my direct control? Laura?
Yeah, can you describe what that process looks like from just like some points of what it looks like for a child to go from that natural, like totally self-absorbed baby to beginning to see the parameters of the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's an exquisite thing, and there's certainly some variability with children, but in our family, a lot of it came through the new baby. I mean, the baby's the baby until the new baby came. In my home, that was every year or so, and so that was a pretty easy built-in lesson. Not everybody does it that way. But when that's the case, when you have the baby has to quit being a baby because there's a new baby, then you start to see, okay, what we did is that we highly valued the baby. And so I never had with any of my children this kind of like sibling envy. I'm not saying it's bad if you do, some children do. It just wasn't something that we experienced because the new baby was such a precious thing in our home. We expected it, mama was sick and we had to take care of her, and we had expectation, and we talked about names, and it was just this wonderful experience for the new baby to come, and everybody's excited about it. You listen to put your ear on mama's tummy and feel the baby, all this stuff. Like, it was this hyped up thing. And so when the new baby comes, now there's an opportunity to take care of somebody. Now you're not being taken care of. Now you can take care of somebody. And so creating that kind of like empathy and responsibility are two keys to transition from that infancy self-orientation to other orientation. And so you could do that with a lot of things. You could do it with chores and responsibilities. And I would say that the more intentionality around these things, the better. Like, so if you teach the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old to set the table, why do we do that? In the early stages of training the child to do that task, it's not a particularly important task to have forks and plates set on a table. That's not the point. I mean, it's nice. It's good to sit down and the table set. That's not the point. The point is that this child is taking care of somebody. My wife was great at setting little children on the counter when she was washing dishes. Made dishwashing way harder. It was a mess. Way more water to clean up, all that stuff. But you're taking care of the family and creating that sense of responsibility and otherness in that we do this for them. Erica also was very good at in the early stage of our family, she never I won't say never, very rarely did she miss an opportunity to bring the children with her into the world. So if we had to go grocery shopping, everybody was going grocery shopping. There were some miserable grocery shopping experiences. But it was worth it, just like sitting at the sink and splashing water all around while we're washing dishes. It's worth it to go through the work at the early stages. And this is such an important piece. It's worth the work. The front end work is an investment. The younger you can teach a child to behave and to be responsible and to be obedient and to care for other people, the better the fruit is for the length of your family. And so changing that self-orientation to other orientation, you could do it with chores, you could do it with pets, but responsibility and empathy are the places to do it. Care about other people. And so we can do that with our training for play, right? So I would recommend, especially young families, get together as young families. It's the same thing as going out for groceries or putting the child at the sink for dishes. Get together with other families and have problems. Let the children have problems playing together and sit there and figure it out. Have a play date specifically to work on these behavior issues and say, okay, hey, you have to have a good friend, but you say, Sally is hitting when we're playing. I would really like to work on this with her. Can we get together? I'll be careful. I don't want your child to get hurt, but I would like to work on this issue with my child. Can we get together and play together? I'll watch, I promise, but let's get together and work on this issue. Do you have something you want to work on? Yeah, I need to work on sharing. Okay, let's get the kids together. We'll spend an hour on a Tuesday. We'll put some toys on the floor. We'll sit next to them. Me and you can talk, and we'll watch the kids play and work on this environment. So in that environment, there's a very conducive way. If Sally's hitting, as soon as that behavior starts to crop up, you're right there, you grab her, you put her on your lap, and you say, how does it feel when people hit you? You don't want to hit, you don't want to be hit, don't hit. Let's learn to talk, let's learn to share, and just get involved in the training of that problem and start to teach the child, if you don't like it, they don't like it. That's the key to empathy. If you don't like it, they don't like it. If you wouldn't want somebody to do that to you, don't do it to them. This is so many training experiences are just that. And it's golden rule stuff. It's golden rule from the floor. Like, the way you want to be treated is how you should treat other people. And conditioning that central experience into all these different training opportunities is the way. Yep.